There's lots to unpack. Let's get straight to our panel. Craig Shirley joins us from Richmond, Virginia. He's a Reagan biographer and presidential historian. Joining us here in Washington, Eleanor Clift is a political reporter with the Daily Beast. Also with us is Wardah Khalid. She's a policy analyst focusing on Muslim American issues. Atiba Madyun joins us on set as well. He's president and founder of Party Politics US. Welcome to all of you to the show. Craig Shirley, let me start with you, and let's start with that vote in the House of Representatives in the US Congress. What do you make of the fact that so few Republicans voted to condemn the president for what many people are saying were racist comments? I mean, firstly, do you consider those comments racist?
Well, what I think is irrelevant. What you see as the dynamic here is simply party loyalty, and we see party loyalty all the time. You know, even in the darkest days of Watergate, Richard Nixon still had a base of support among Republicans, even as August of 1974. Bill Clinton could count on Democratic support in the dark days of his impeachment, which is why he was, you know, the Senate didn't vote to convict him. The Republican Congress did, but the Senate did not. It's simply a function of party loyalty. It'll get separated out later, I suppose, but right now, the country is very polarized and has been polarized for really going back to 1964 when the two parties began separating. There used to be overlap between the two parties. There used to be liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and that's how they compromised on so many things. But over the last 50 years, you've seen the separation of the two parties so that one is monolithic and the other is monolithic, and they represent two competing views of the world, and which is why there's very little compromise today.
Eleanor, you're a seasoned political observer here in the United States, here in Washington. You've covered many presidencies. Have we ever seen a president's words condemned like this, as we've just seen in the U.S. House of Representatives?
No, absolutely not. And no president, certainly in my memory and also in reading the history books, has ever made remarks like this that can fairly be called racist remarks in a country that prides itself on its inclusion and its diversity. One point of fact I would take issue with Craig Shirley, my friend. It was a Republican Senate that did not convict Bill Clinton, so that was not, the partisan lines were not the way they are today. And what we see here is the president seeming to be putting into play the same strategy that got him elected in 2016, which is playing on grievances. Grievances about immigration, grievances about race. Typically, when a president gets into office, they try to bring people together, although playing what your correspondent referred to as the race card is not uncommon in this country, but it's playing it with a bullhorn designed to inflame the country is a very different matter.
Right, Eleanor, but if we look at this vote in the U.S. House, it was carried pretty much along party lines. So what was the significance of it?
Well, the significance was that we saw some 90 Democrats support impeachment, which was the second vote that happened after the vote to condemn the president. But the significance of is the Republicans standing by this president. And the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, is really resisting impeachment because she doesn't want it to be characterized as partisan. And I think what we've learned from the Clinton impeachment is that if you're going to really take a president to task, you need support from both parties, and it's not there in the Republican Party. And there are significant, more than half of the Democratic caucus did not vote in favor because they come from those districts that were held by Republicans, and you know, their constituents are not ready to cross that line either.
Wardah Khalid, it seems that Republicans, even rank-and-file Republican members, are prepared to stand by the president. I mean, the president has said that he believes many Americans agree with the sentiments he expressed, and the polls bear him out. Support among Republicans went up 5%, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. It now stands at 72% among Republicans. So it seems President Trump's views, I mean, they're not an aberration.
I think what it shows us is that morality has now split among partisan lines, and that is deeply distressing to people of color in the United States, because all of those Republican members who voted against this resolution, they represent constituents, and I can bet you probably all of them represent constituents of color, at least some in their districts. And that number is only going to increase as the United States becomes a more diverse country throughout the years. And so when I look at this resolution, it's deeply concerning to me because I understand party loyalty and wanting to support the president and, you know, making sure they win in 2020 or whatever their thing might be. But at the same time, when you have comments that are so horrific, so blatantly racist, and it is relevant. I'm going to say to Craig who said that it was irrelevant, they are relevant. It is relevant whether those comments were racist or not, because it describes the conversation that we're having in this country. And now you have the President of the United States basically saying it is okay to make those sorts of comments, and now he has emboldened people around the country to do the same.
Craig, I'll give you a chance to respond very quickly. We just heard those comments are relevant.
Of course they're relevant. That's why we're here talking about them tonight. The question is that are they long-lasting? Are they part of Trump's strategy? But I want to go back to what Eleanor said, my old friend, is that Woodrow Wilson may have been the most racist president in American history. He previewed Birth of a Nation in the White House. He issued the executive order creating separate but equal in the federal government. He was very disdainful of African Americans. We've had a long history of presidents in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century who have dabbled in racism. Franklin Roosevelt snubbed Jesse Owens. He refused to desegregate the Army during World War II. So every president has a black mark on his, or many presidents have a black mark on their reputations.
Atiba, of course, there's been a lot of discussion over why the president said this, what's behind it, etc. There was a commentator in the Financial Times who said that there is method behind this nastiness. Those are the words the commentator used. He said the president's goal is to force Democrats to unite behind the so-called squad of 4 non-white congresswomen whose radicalism is not popular in the U.S. heartland. So the president, what he's trying to do here is to present the Democratic Party as a radical party all across. As a party as a whole. What do you make of that assessment?
It keeps feeling like the president's trying to make the Democrats as being the anarchists, when anarchy is really coming from the top. And when we keep looking at this whole play of the land, race has always played a big part in American history. If we could say Woodrow Wilson was one of the most racist presidents, we could go back to Andrew Johnson, who became president after Lincoln was assassinated. We have had a long history of racism in this country. It's almost like right now we have this conversation that's going on, but to me, the president represents a lot of things. He represents the plantation owner. He represents all the things that African Americans and immigrants and others in this country have talked about and have warned about. What we are seeing now is what happens when you put someone in that office who is irresponsible. So we keep hearing the terms narcissistic. We keep hearing the term he's a whining baby. All these things really embody who this person is, but this person has trade talks that are stalling. He has issues that are going on in the Middle East and around the country. What he really is doing is destabilizing this country. We have too many positions around the country where we have ambassador and political appointments that have not been filled, but we keep focusing on the train wreck. We keep focusing on the issues that people like Steve Bannon want us to focus on race. And we're having this conversation and we keep getting off of what's going on at the border with immigration. And so we keep getting distracted.
Right, so are you saying, Atiba, that this issue that we're talking about, the comments that the president made, is a distraction?
People like to win, and so if his base feels as if they're going to win because this is the issue, and then he's seeing the other side, because in order to win, you have to have an enemy. And this enemy that he keeps creating, it keeps getting distracted. Within the Democratic Party, we know that there are a lot of different factions. We have 4 young congresswomen who are in office, who are speaking out, who are coming from a generation. We've talked for years about bullying, for instance. These young women are equipped. They know how to handle a bully. They're not afraid to stand up to him. What I think that we also have is this old power versus new power. And we've got to figure out, I think the Democrats are going to have to figure out, how do they get behind the energy that they have in these young people in office who look very much like the country is becoming.
Craig, what do you make of what's happening right now? I mean, is there a political strategy behind this, an election strategy behind it? Is it ultimately about the 2020 election?
You know, I came from the era of Reagan. I worked for Reagan. I've written 4 books about Ronald Reagan. He had a much different way about going about these things. You know, at the 1980 Republican convention, he made an open appeal to Democrats and independents to join what he called a community of shared values. is that he had a far different way of appealing to the broad swath of American people. Instead of dividing, it was about uniting, which is why at the end of his administration, he had over 70% approval among the American people. When he was reelected in 1984, he got something like 33% of Democratic voters in America. So I don't endorse it. I don't like it. I think it's destructive to America. I guess we're here to analyze it. But is that there's a better way of going about these things. There's a better way of making a political argument about freedom versus collectivism than what Trump is doing now.
But Craig, isn't this pushing the Republican Party further and further to the right? The president is actually pushing them.
Well, I don't think racism is associated with the right or with conservatism. As I said before, a long history of racism is more assigned to the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. It was the Republican Party that delivered the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It was the Republican Party that was founded to eliminate racism, slavery in America. So I don't think that racism is associated with conservatism.
Eleanor, the 4 congresswomen at the center of the president's comments, they held a news conference shortly after the president said that, in which they responded to the president. Let's listen to parts of what each one of them had to say.
As we all know, the recent tweets and words from the president are simply a continuation of his racist and xenophobic playbook.
This is the agenda of white nationalists. Whether it is happening in chat rooms or it's happening on national TV, and now it's reached the White House garden.
No matter what the president says, this country belongs to you. And it belongs to everyone.
Given the size of this squad and this great nation, we cannot, we will not be silenced.
It's a tough group of women, and as Atiba said, they know how to handle a bully.
Well, but they're expert at social media, and they have a huge following, and I totally agree that the Democrats have to figure out a way to harness that energy. But they are each from safely Democratic districts that don't elect Republicans. And if the Democrats are going to keep their majority in the House, they have to worry about the 42 Democrats who won in districts that were held by Republicans. Donald Trump could get reelected. I mean, he has the power of the incumbency. He has a very spirited base that he is continuing to inflame. He doesn't believe that there are any votes, persuadable votes out there. He just wants to get out every last vote that he thinks belongs to him. If he should win and the Democrats also lose the House, that would be very bad, I think, not only for Democrats, but for the country. And so the Speaker is a vote counter, and she made the comment that the squad has 4 votes. Now, you could argue they have more than that, but she has to muster majorities in the House, and she has to tend to a big caucus. And the president is reportedly bragging that he has married Pelosi with the squad and made them the face of the Democratic Party, and that. That's his strategy. That's not just
can that strategy
from the heart.
Can that strategy, the strategy he's using right now, can it fail? Because if you look at the last election, he won by what, 80,000 votes in 3 states. He lost the popular vote.
That's right.
And that's all it takes for him to lose.
Well, it's the 3 states. The Democrats have to find a nominee who can win these heartland states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I've even forgotten the 3rd one. Wisconsin, right, exactly. They could drive up the popular vote where Hillary Clinton won by 3 million. They could drive that up to 5 or 6 million by turning out all of us folks in the urban areas. But getting to that select band of kind of rural voters is a specific task because of our electoral college and the oddities of our electoral system.
Sorry, you want to say?
Can I ask something? But I also think that there's something really missing in this. You can't vote, you can't count votes today, not the same way you used to. It's a whole different lay of the land. When I'm following, and yes, I'm following these particular 4 women on social media, and I'm following the Speaker, and I keep seeing these women out there with the voters. When I'm following the candidates that are on the campaign trail, I'm not seeing Biden out the same way that I'm seeing Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. There is something happening in this country. The people are waiting to see a profile in courage. They're waiting to see someone to step to the forefront and say, we're going to do this differently. We're going to energize you the same way the president did with the Make America Great Again slogan. They're looking for the Democrats to have a patriotic message that resonates with not just the base, that resonates with independents as well as with Republicans who are on the fence because they realize that this country is going in the wrong direction.
I don't disagree with that, but to pass anything in the Congress, you need 218 votes in the House, or as Speaker Pelosi says, you're just having a conversation.
Well,
and you need 51 or 60 in the Senate. There are certain barriers that are there, and I would like to believe, well, these millions of people are going to turn out, but I've heard about that.
And there are people on the ground.
Jesse Jackson won in 1988.
There are people on the ground that are feeling for a long time this abyss of despair and these barriers to inclusion, and they're waiting for someone to help pull themselves up by these bootstraps. They're not getting that.
I wanted to say, when talking about Congress, I think what's really important to note is in 2018, all the seats that flipped, that was called the blue wave. It wasn't the blue stop. You know, it was the blue wave. That wave is going to keep on going. And I think people in the House and the Senate are counting on that. And I think people like the 4 congresswomen that we're talking about here have energized millions of people. They've energized different candidates to run that can energize different voters. And so I don't think that it's going to stop. I think that it's going to keep going. And I think that is something that House leadership and Senate leadership and presidential candidates running should consider, because it's,
I don't think anybody opposes that.
Bring
it on if it's going to happen.
I'll get to you, Craig. Sorry, Craig, go on. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say is that there may be a blue wave. It remains to be seen. We still got a year and a half to go. Is that most presidents in their first term experience a disastrous setback, or at least a setback, and lose seats to the other party. Eisenhower did in '54, Lyndon Johnson in '66, Richard Nixon in 1970, Ronald Reagan in 1982, and yet all of them came back to win, or the exception of Johnson, of course, but all of them came back to win 2 years later. It's more, it's a referendum on the president, yes, but the president has 2 years to recover. And just because Trump lost 2 years ago or a year and a half ago doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to lose a year and a half from now.
Well, I want to ask you a question. This is a bit of a personal question. If we look at social media right now, over the last few days, it's been filled with people talking about their own experiences. People who've been said, yeah, I've been told, you know, if you don't like it here, leave the country. Have you ever experienced that?
I think for the first time that I experienced that was actually on social media. I don't think I've ever experienced it in person, and actually this week was the first time I've ever been called a communist. And I was like, wow, we've gone back to the 1950s and McCarthyism. This is stuff I read about in my school textbooks. So yeah, I mean, online is always full of trolls. That's where you get the most hate. But yeah, people all the time will say to me, and I'm sure other people of color get it too, go back to your own country. And I want to bring it back to Congress. What I think is really interesting is several members of Congress tweeted after President Trump did that. They said, hey, I was actually born in a foreign country and I disagree with his views. Why isn't he telling me to go back to where I came from? It is a specific trope that is racist, and it's used for people of color only. So if you look at that and the experiences that we've had with them, there's no other way to see that.
Atiba, you know, there was a poll done by USA Today. Sorry, Craig, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just going to say, when the Irish came here in the late 1800s, they were told to go back. When the Germans came here in the 1920s, they were told to go home. They weren't people of color. So it happens often in this country. I can tell you from personally, you know, my father-in-law is from Pakistan. He's been here for many, many years, came here because of religious persecution in Pakistan and India. And I don't think, you know, I've ever talked to him many times about this subject. He's never been told in this country to go back home.
Yeah, Atiba, the poll I was talking about, USA Today Ipsos poll, asked whether President Trump's tweets were un-American. This was the response. Overall, 59% of people said, yes, it's un-American. But among Republicans, only 25% said un-American, while among Democrats was 88%. Among independents, just over half thought the comments were un-American. Do any of those numbers surprise you?
No. And up until March of 2017, I was a registered Republican. But because this president came into office with the rhetoric and with the language that he's been using, I could no longer be part of this Republican Party. What's bothering me is that we don't have a moral voice within the Republican Party. I think Mitt Romney tried a little bit to put himself out there before while he was running for Senate as well as now. But we don't have a moral voice in there. We used to have John McCain, at least, if someone who, you know, didn't go with and follow the leader. But the Republican Party has switched. There used to be a time when the Democrats were the party that was protecting the enslavers. Now it's the Republican Party that's protecting the white supremacists. And so that's just the reality. And it's a shame to say it, that this party that we say of Lincoln or this party of Reagan has become what it is.
Eleanor, something else which I think is unprecedented, and that is the president has been criticized by foreign leaders. We had criticism from the British Prime Minister Theresa May. He called his remarks unacceptable. The New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said, I completely and utterly disagree with him. This is what the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said. Let's watch this.
I think Canadians and indeed people around the world know exactly what I think about those particular comments. That is not how we do things in Canada. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and the diversity of our country is actually one of our greatest strengths and a source of tremendous resilience and pride for Canadians, and we will continue to defend that.
So, Eleanor, these are close U.S. allies criticizing the president on what is essentially a domestic issue.
I'm sure they have lots of criticisms of this president that they have suppressed, and we saw some of that in the hacking of the British ambassador's words. And what the president said was loathsome, and in all of these other democracies, they're dealing with immigrants coming in and diversity issues, but they recognize that the wave of the future is more diversity, and this president is fighting a losing battle, and he's really hurting his party, I think, on the way, and he's hurting America.
Craig, I don't disagree. I agree with you completely. Yeah, go ahead.
Craig, the question is, how concerned are you that there are white nationalists, white supremacists, the KKK, groups espousing Nazi views that are finding common cause with what this president is saying?
I don't know about that. I do know what the Republican Party has stood for. I do know that the Republican Party does evolve over time. It is sometimes more traditional conservative, sometimes it's more neocon, sometimes it's more populist. It goes through different phases. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party have switched sides on trade, on war, even on the life issue. It was thought before Roe v. Wade is that a heavy number of Democrats were, being Catholic, were pro-life. So the issues constantly change, which means the parties constantly change. And the Republican Party is simply going through an evolution now, but I don't think it's anything, I don't know anything, I'm not a registered Republican, I'm registered independent in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I don't know anything about embracing white supremacists or white nationalists or anything like that. I think that's just, look, I don't think I think we're over-intellectualizing what Trump's tweet was. I don't think it was a strategy to win re-election or to win renomination. I think it was just you know, him just flying off at the handle and saying something in the dead of night.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.